privacy and cybersecurity. We have our moderator, James Roy, Poulter, CEO at Blockchain Reserve, Eva Škorničková, data privacy and cybersecurity advisor, and David Carvalho, who's the CEO at Naoris Cyber Blockchain. Can you please give them a very warm round of applause?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us straight after lunch. I'm James Roy Poulter, CEO of Blockchain Reserve. We're a boutique investment bank which helps later stage entrepreneurs, typically Series B, Series C stage, raise capital from the crypto capital community. We're based out of London with a team across 8 countries. But we're here to talk about cybersecurity and data privacy. We're going to start with some, I guess, like some high level to kind of like set the scene on the change which is coming across these issues due to blockchain. And then we're going to dive into some of the specific issues which are of direct relevance to pretty much every single person in this room. So with that said, I'd love to just start by just like, I guess, like trying to understand or talk about at a high level, what impact blockchain is going to have on the global cybersecurity world.
First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Eva Škorničková, and I am responsible for basically my introduction to the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, to your guys. You should be aware of the existence of these new harmonized rules in Europe that will basically bring the protection of our data to a completely different level. And despite the fact that this is the European law, it's very important for you to know that in case that you are processing the data, personal data of your customers, of your clients, even that you don't have a physical presence in Europe, there will be impact of this regulation on you. That's the concept of GDPR. So that's why, back to your question, it's the GDPR will basically impact the blockchain as well, because in any case, when in any situation you are processing the data, personal data through the blockchain, especially if the biometric or the healthcare and health data are included, you have to be aware of the existence of the regulation, which will be effective since May this year.
David, actually, I was quite rude and didn't ask you both to introduce yourselves. So do you mind, David, if you take the opportunity to just introduce yourself to the audience?
No, thank you very much. No, it wasn't rude at all. You're just a very nice guy. Nothing to do with that. Actually, I've already gave a speech yesterday. My name is David Carvalho. I am the CEO of Naoris Cyber Blockchain. And I have been on the cybersecurity space since I was very, very young. And I continue on that space now in the circumstance of blockchain. Going back to your question and speaking a little bit about what Eva just mentioned, GDPR is indeed a thing. I guess most people here don't know what that means. That's a general data protection regulation from the European Union that actually impacts every company that deals with the European Union. Now, something that impacts also quite heavily that space is the fact that hacking is incredibly prevalent. And how can I say, any breaches can incur a fine of about 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover of the company. Not profit, turnover. So that can be a huge amount, in many cases a survivability event for some businesses. So it's something definitely to keep an eye open. In regards to how the blockchain can, and in my opinion will, and is changing cybersecurity, data protection, in the way that we know it, I think the change that is coming is absolutely fundamental. I personally believe, as a cybersecurity professional, that blockchain has indeed the capacity not just to transform an environment that was traditionally centralized and focused on single points of failure around systems, companies, or vendors, as vendors, interestingly, can also act as a point of failure because they don't share information with each other, and that's to detriment to the detriment of their clients. And also because companies have many cybersecurity and data protection systems from different vendors, and they also don't share data between themselves, even within your own environment. So I think blockchain can actually create a revolution on that space from the point of view of cyber intelligence and data protection threats, where actually all companies can benefit from an environment that can share information based on an anonymous blockchain that allows businesses or organizations to be on top of threats and risks to their data, to their customer base, and actually react much quicker to threats than they can these days. On top of that, I think that on the space of hacking itself, that impacts, how can I say, it's probably, cybercrime is the biggest impact on cybersecurity globally. There's about, just going into statistics, about $6 trillion lost every year to cybersecurity-related fraud and hacking. That's about almost 4 times the GDP of the UK, which is a massive number. And I think the blockchain has the potential and the promise to fundamentally change those numbers going down. And that's something that I believe can happen for the first time ever. Even though we get more and more devices and more complexity on systems, the blockchain actually thrives in complexity, right? So the more devices exist in a system and more complex they are, actually within a blockchain cybersecurity environment, they are in effect more protected than if there were less devices and less complexity compared to traditional systems.
That all sounds very positive in terms of the impacts that blockchain could have. Are there some deeper risks, of having all of our data stored in a distributed fashion across the world? Are there some, potentially very bad things from an aspect of cybersecurity that blockchain could end up having?
From my perspective, then I'll pass my word to Eva. But from my perspective as a, how can I say, cybersecurity researcher, I very much expect certain, and this is something that I haven't heard anybody speak about because I think of the general lack of understanding what blockchain is, and also the complexity of the cybersecurity space, which is the fact that cyber threats can actually leverage blockchain itself. And there is no reason why traditional malware, viruses, botnets, and other risks or threats cannot leverage blockchain. They will probably leverage blockchain in the future, and in my opinion, the only environments that can defend against such threats are indeed blockchain-based systems that we will see probably appearing in the next years. Our case, we are the first one doing that. We are foreseeing that this is a real risk. As you know, botnets are very prevalent on the internet. They are in charge of about 98% of all spam. It's not humans, so they are bots. And they rely on hijacked computers called zombies to actually do their work for them, sometimes numbering on the millions, everything from distributed denials of system to spamming and phishing. And they rely on specific command and control centers that tend to be centralized. And this is where their weakness resides. Because once these command and control centers are taken down by a cybersecurity analyst, they lose the capacity to communicate with their hosts, with their zombies. But within a blockchain environment, every single point, every zombie could potentially become a command and control center. So in effect, it would be kind of like a Hydra situation with many heads. So I'm not, how can I say, I'm quite pessimistic on that space. And at the same time, I'm very optimistic that we finally have a different tool to combat threats that otherwise we couldn't combat.
No, thank you. I mean, Eva, to move on from the kind of the general cybersecurity positives and negatives of blockchain, you mentioned GDPR briefly in your introduction. I hope that most people in the room would have come across that because it's going to be affecting everyone. I think from the 25th of May this year. Do you want to give an overview to everyone, what the issue is and why they should care about this?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit come back to what David said, that blockchain can be basically considered as a very friendly tool how to protect especially the personal data, which is also my experience and my comment on that, because GDPR obviously comes from the centralized world, because this is again another regulation that have to be followed by the companies, and as you already know, the blockchain is decentralized, basically tool. So there are some, I would say, disproportions, between these two words. But as regards the data privacy, I really consider the blockchain as a very friendly tool, because it's basically the electronic database which is secured against data manipulation, because as you know, the blockchain as a consensus is immutable system. So GDPR has a couple of covers a couple of obligations that probably were not considered at the time when GDPR was drafted. For example, one of the principle which on which GDPR is based is data minimization, and you will be required to delete, to erase the data at the time when you really don't need them. You don't have the appropriate the legal title and the reason why you should process and handle data anymore. But with the blockchain, that would be really challenging to get these data erased because of the principle how blockchain is constructed. So the main maybe the new things or new obligations that each company has with respect to GDPR. First of all, you will be obliged to notify the regulatory authorities about your data breach. So in any case, when you will realize that there is something happened with your data, personal data of your clients or employees, then you are obliged to notify the regulatory authorities within 72 hours, which is quite short period of time. The other obligation each company has, according to GDPR, is the principle of accountability. So you are obliged to implement basically or technical or organizational measures with respect to the data you process. And in case that you are processing biometric or the genetic data, you really have to respect GDPR, because the principle of processing these critical or sensitive data is very high priority from GDPR perspective. And what maybe would be relevant to many of you, because we are in Seoul, and we are completely outside of EU territory, in case that you don't have a physical presence of your company, or at least some branches, whatever, in Europe, you need EU representative. Even that you are based outside of EU territory, you need your EU representative for as a main contact for anything which will happen, with the data that are basically processed through your system. So I think this is the most important, obligations that the company will have according to GDPR.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting because, in a sense, GDPR is a very forward-thinking, new set of regulations that's potentially ahead of, where blockchain is in terms of putting, data back in the hands of the individual and letting them control, who has access to that, right? It's almost exactly what blockchain as a movement is trying to do. And here we have, government doing it probably faster and more aggressively than we're able to as a community. So it's very interesting. But moving to focus a bit more on data privacy. Again, blockchain offers potentially an interesting conundrum where you have, at least it appears at times that you have a very private, flow of transactions across the blockchain, yet at the same time you have the most transparent and perfectly auditable flow of funds that have ever existed. So, what is, for an open question for you both, what is blockchain's impact on privacy right now, and what is it going to become?
Okay, so I'll start with that. That's actually, thank you for the question. That's not the trivial one, but I'll try to go a little bit on that. Right. So maybe I'll speak a little bit about privacy versus anonymity here. Since we have private blockchains, and we have public blockchains, and we have anonymous blockchains, and we have everything in between. I think that both for society's progress and for the decentralization of power, or for the centralization of power, every single one of them, or these use cases, has their place. So even though anonymity in certain chains brings, how can I say, a level of freedom, and a level of, how can I say, subversion potential, in terms of, there's a standing, how can I say, power structure that obviously cannot react to any subversive or activist efforts. I think it's important to keep and maintain anonymity within certain systems in order to keep this power itself in check and true and honest to its own principles. Otherwise, we can have a situation where actually anonymity or the lack of thereof could create an environment of extreme control. So I think we should probably strive for a balance between both of them. I understand that this topic is, how can I say, quite philosophical, and there's a level of depth to it. But I fundamentally believe that both these environments should either, they should be separate, they shouldn't work in unison, because you lose, can I say, trust from one environment to the other if they are in unison. So they should definitely exist and in a separate format, and I think that will improve our society and the way that we do business and the way that we do politics and the way that we do democracy moving forward.
And so you're leaning to the side of anonymity. No?
I didn't say that.
Because I guess my big problem with anonymity is that there is just a reality that privacy, I think, is important. Anonymity is potentially a step too far, in that you can allow, or maybe it facilitates transactions that we don't want to happen in a society. Maybe that allows an environment where you can have terrorism financing, or you can have tax avoidance. And so I think a lot about how we're going to square that circle and take the benefits from anonymity and from privacy that blockchain can drive out, but still function as a society. Like, can we bring those two things together?
It's a good point. I want to give the voice to Eva as well, but I just want to make a quick point here. I am actually optimistic that we can arrive at the point that you just mentioned. I actually had a conversation recently with about blockchain with the CIA attaché in London about accessing, how can I say, people's encryption or computers in, how can I say, contained manner, in a legal manner. Because as you know, many governments these days, they actually access your data without asking you. Just they treat you like a criminal online, but not offline. This is not correct. Obviously, these rules should apply across the board. It shouldn't just be for the real world and not the virtual world. And we actually arrive at some kind of like understanding where, yeah, for example, if there was an environment where keys were known for access to certain machines or certain cryptographic algorithms that law enforcement could take over and then use, but in a public manner, so that we actually keep, we have the knowledge that this is happening, from a media perspective, from a, how can I say, keeping record perspective. It keeps these institutions of power honest, and it also keeps citizens honest in the same way, while actually maintaining the structures that we have today in a blockchain world.
Thank you. Eva, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just would like to go back to the discussion we have about the anonymity and encryption, because this is really the critical point from the GDPR perspective, because anonymized data are not covered by GDPR, which is very important to know for all of you. But there is still pending discussion, and that's why also the blockchain attracts the attention of regulatory authorities and obviously the EU institutions, whether really the data that are processed through the blockchain are really anonymized, because then obviously the blockchain will be out of the scope of GDPR. However, if we look at from the technical standpoint how the keys are built, there is maybe comments from you guys, but the latest discussions I also was the part of is that for example the public key or the even the private key are just encrypted data, which means they are pseudonymized, and that's why the blockchain should still be subject of GDPR. So basically, the companies that are just, are doing the blockchain, and creating the blockchain tools, they have to look at that from the perspective, yes, we are under GDPR regulation, because even that we think that all the data are encrypted, anonymized, but still they are not fully anonymized. Still, there is someone, within the system who has access to the real data. And that's the point that always have to be considered, and we as consultants have to look at really deeply into the blockchain as it's structured. So that is the key point.
Oh, thank you. And again, to kind of spin onto the other side of privacy here, are the benefits to privacy exaggerated in blockchain? So I think that most of American citizens a year ago thought that they were never going to have to pay taxes on the crypto that they held. Yet we've had the US, I can't remember the exact organization, whether it's the FBI, whatever, publicly admitting that they are tracking the IP addresses of every single transaction which is occurring on the blockchain. You are going to have to pay your taxes. What is there a limit to how private a blockchain can be? Just with the backdrop of governments like that at the end of the day can track transactions, destination, and origination. Are there limits, or are there again other aspects of blockchain's benefits and privacy which are exaggerated?
If I may speak about that, privacy and operational security around privacy is quite, it's a topic that I hold dear. And I wanted to ask regarding your question, if your question is about, is it technically feasible to have absolute anonymity, or is it acceptable to have absolute anonymity?
Let's go for technically feasible.
Okay, so that's a simple answer. The answer is a resounding yes. Absolutely technically feasible. Encryption is mathematically perfect, and until we have a singularity of quantum computing, I think we can trust our private keys. Until then, private keys can be generated with quantum-resistant hashes as well, that, as mathematics difficulty scales and quantum capability to break that encryption also scales, we still maintain this level of difficulty very much akin to what we have these days. Looking into the future, I think there is a massive demand for private protocols and high privacy crypto. I don't expect that demand to disappear, and I don't expect it to for several reasons. The main one is because the vast majority of these, encryption algorithms and the techniques to do it is open source. It wasn't always like this until about the 70s. Encryption models were actually considered ammunition, so they couldn't be exported. But now they are in the open source domain, and you can actually very easily, following online guides, transform pretty much any of your crypto transactions into anonymous and traceable crypto transactions, not because you're using a private blockchain, well, even though a private blockchain obviously helps, but by actually making it very, very hard for an observer to actually know who you are and what you're doing, or know what you're doing while they know who you are, or vice versa.
Technically feasible, yes. We sadly don't have the time to get into whether that's the right thing to achieve.
Yeah.
Eva, do you have any closing thoughts across the topics we've covered through the panel?
Just one comment. IP address is a personal data according to GDPR, so that's why everybody has to know that even with IP addresses are considered as a personal data. Otherwise, yeah, that I can talk about GDPR for hours. Which I usually used to do. However, if you have any questions, I am still here around, or if you would like to get the presentation and with the main topics regarding GDPR, just let me know. And thank you for your presence here.
Thank you everyone very much for listening. We're going to keep you on time and get away to drinks or whatever plans you have later today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kamsahamnida.